Good evening, everybody. Thank you for downloading this very special edition of After Hours AM, Trick or Treat Edition. Every year about this time, we try to compile a couple of the scariest interviews that we have ever done in After Hours AM, and tonight is no exception. First, we'll be joined by Bob Cramner, a former Army officer and former political figure in the City of Pittsburgh. He is the author of Demon of Brownsville Road, the extremely scary tale detailing his battle with the demonic. And in Interview 2, we have the one and only Andrea Perron joining us. Andrea will take us through the real Conjuring. What happened, what was not on film, what was too scary for film. You're going to hear everything directly from Andrea about the real tale of the Conjuring. So we'd like to thank you for downloading this edition of After Hours AM. Take care of each other, love each other, and let's get scared.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of After Hours AM.
Woohoo!
And beside me, like always, the beautiful Jennifer Matson. How you doing, Jen?
I'm not doing too bad, handsome.
Well, thank you. And of course, as always, Mr. Joel Sturgis here at the helm.
Yes, yes.
Well,
yes.
you know, I thought that sounded cool there to say that for a second.
It sounded better in your head.
Well, I watched Star Trek, and so he would say you have the helm.
Love Star Trek.
I know, because I got
I'm a Star
stuck in my
Trek
head.
junkie.
I know you are. Big time. Big time. I know. It's crazy. But it finally warmed up in the Great White North, so we are all giddy with excitement that we can watch snow melt.
It was so beautiful. I watched a big, humongous icicle drip down to nothing. How beautiful is that? Yeah. Did a little barbecuing. Oh, yeah.
Well, I love barbecue.
Oh, me too.
Well,
yeah.
anyhow, before we get off subject too far on barbecue, because I know a lot of great secrets about barbecuing, we have a great guest tonight.
Oh, you know what?
Oh yeah,
I know.
He is the author, the author of The Demon of Brownsville Road. That's right.
Yeah.
Bob Cranmer. Am I correct, Bob? Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Yes, that's correct, Bob Cranmer.
I always
Perfect.
stress before I have a guest on about killing their last name. And so even if it's the short ones like yours, I'm like, oh my gosh, how would you pronounce that? Yeah. Well, anyhow, Bob, I have been looking over your website. We actually talked on the phone before the show. I got to say, it's a hair-raising tale. And I actually know Mr. Adam Bly personally, which you know him as well. And so when he puts his name on something, it is the legit deal, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so I was looking over your stuff, Bob, and how did it all begin, I guess, would be the best way to start, right from the top.
Well, it began in late 1988 when my wife and I and our 4 young children moved back to a little town called Brentwood, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. It's where I grew up. And it just so happened that I had been in the military. I was a military officer. And we decided we wanted to move home and give our kids kind of a normal life growing up without all the moving around that a military life involves. So
Right.
To our surprise, when we moved home, my surprise, I should say, a particular house that had always fascinated me from my childhood, intrigued me, fascinated me, came up for sale. In fact, it really didn't even make it onto the market. My mother heard that it was going to be up for sale, and we contacted the owners before they even got it on the market, and we ended up buying the house.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty neat experience to move back to my home and get this house. But after we had been in the house for a month or so, we came to realize that there were issues with the house.
Now, what kind of issues, Bob? I mean, we're not talking about like electrical problems
No.
or the roof needs to be repaired.
No.
I mean, we're
need
talking
new
about
windows.
other things. Am I correct?
Sure. It certainly was an old house, over 80 years old at the time, and needed some work. But what we began to notice is something that we had never experienced before, never had any contact or experience with, and that's some paranormal activity. After we realized that there was no explanation for what was taking place, our children were 4 years old and under, so they weren't playing any pranks on us.
Right.
We came to the conclusion, okay, there's a ghost. The house is haunted.
Did you kind of think it was like Casper the Friendly Ghost in the beginning? Like, okay, it's
sure.
just the charm of the house, you know?
It didn't seem malevolent. It didn't seem threatening. It kind of freaked us out somewhat. I mean, when you first experienced, those types of things coming down in the morning and all the lights being on and the radio playing or other things like that, and you realize that I didn't do it, she didn't do it. Once you kind of get past that, we just realize, well, okay, we'll just live with this.
It kind of became commonplace, I guess, to come down and see something like that, and you and the other half probably said, well, you know what? If there's a ghost here, it doesn't seem to be bothering anybody, so we'll just,
That's right.
We'll just let it do its thing.
We'll just share space here.
That's right. And again, we really didn't tell anybody about it. It was just something that we learned to live with over a period of so many years. I mean, one of the things that happened first that I noticed, or we both noticed, was it's a big old Victorian 3-story house with a big wooden staircase that goes up to a landing and has a railing that goes around, look down into a large foyer. It's a big old house with 5 bedrooms on the second floor and several bedrooms on the third floor.
That's a big house.
It really was kind of like from central casting if you wanted to create a haunted house.
Yeah,
so
the proverbial spooky, big Victorian home.
We didn't have enough furniture to fill the thing, but it was just, it was kind of like going into a big. It kind of felt like going into a big ocean-going ship. The rooms with 10-foot ceilings and big expanse. But so there's underneath the staircase, there is a walk-in closet, and I would go in the morning. I would take my overcoat out of the walk-in closet. Inside the door is a light that looks like it had been initially a gas light with a pull chain on it. Okay. So I would pull the chain, turn on the light, take my coat, go to work, come home at night, open the door, reach for the pull chain, and the pull chain would always, every night, either be wrapped around the top of the light, like thrown over the light, wrapped around the top of it, or it would be meticulously wrapped around the little screws that hold on the glass globe. Really? So I would either couldn't find the chain, or when I'd pull on the chain, it wouldn't pull down because it was wrapped around these little screws. So after that happened 3 or 4 times, I said to my wife, because she also kept the vacuum cleaner in that closet. So I said, when you pull the vacuum cleaner out, you close it. Don't let the chain fly when you turn it off, because it's wrapping itself around the globe, and it's a nuisance. And she said to me, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't been in that closet for a couple days. So I looked at her, and she looked at me, and the next day I said, okay, I'm taking the coat, light, close the door, don't open it all day. I come home. I came home, opened the door, pulled on the light.
And there it is, right?
That was the first thing that we realized, okay, there's something going on here. So it progressively then expanded out into other little, seemingly harmless things over the next couple years.
Nuisances.
Just to mess with you.
Somewhat. Now, I was a little concerned on several occasions. First being when we were in the house with the previous owners, and we were making the deal and what I would what we would pay for the house. And I was a little surprised that when I made my first offer, they said sold.
Wow, they snapped it
Okay.
up that fast.
They snapped it. First offer, sold.
Wow.
I thought to myself, well, I had planned to offer them $15,000-$20,000 more.
Yeah.
I had room to negotiate,
You shot low, hoping
and
to be in
they
your
they
ballpark.
took it. I said, okay, well, this is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, I said to the guy, his name was Jim. I said, Jim, is there anything wrong with this house? Now, again, this is before we moved in, before the chain, before anything.
Yep.
Some reason, the old house, it just kind of had a creepy feeling in it.
You had that gut feeling going on.
Yeah. I didn't know where it came from, but I just did. And he says to me at the time, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with this house. In fact, we've had Mass in the living room several times. My youngest son had his first communion in the living room. Now, for Catholics that are listening, or even non-Catholics, I can say that Mass is not something that generally is, celebrated in somebody's house. It's in, in a church, in a Catholic church. And I thought his answer was a little odd, and I thought, well, they were Irish. Maybe it was some type of special Irish tradition or something. And I just took that for what it was worth, and filed it away. Now, years later, I knew exactly what he meant, because we would end up having Mass on every floor of the house, including the basement.
Oh, yeah.
boy.
Yeah, I don't think he meant mass. He probably meant exorcism.
Yes, and Mass was a part of it. Mass, celebrating Mass, and the consecration of the Eucharist for Catholics that are listening. It's a very sacred thing and a very powerful thing to be done in a residence or in a place, a house, occupied by an evil entity. It's very difficult for an evil entity to experience that taking place. So it's a powerful weapon.
Yeah, it's the nuclear option.
Yes. Now, later that spring, I was in the front yard planting flowers, and I was up near the end we have a long driveway that goes up to the front of the yard, and I was digging at kind of the corner of the property, and my shovel hit something metallic.
Okay.
And I dug up a little box. Now, a little metal box that didn't seem to be, ancient or 50 years old or anything. It wasn't rusted.
Kind of like a keepsake box, maybe,
Yeah,
so it might bury.
exactly. It was metal, though. And I opened it up. What it was like almost, remember the old sucrets?
I do.
Sucrets. It was a little metal box that you would open up and had a lid. I think it was a sucrets box. So I opened it up, and there were rosary beads inside this metal box.
Interesting, because most people, years gone by, if you had a small pet, that like goldfish or something that passed away, it would be real common for you to bury said small pet in a sucrets box.
Right.
But
rosary beads?
Rosary beads.
That would be a big red flag to me as
It
well.
was.
Bob.
So
Yeah.
immediately, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Saturday afternoon. I went in, and the folks that sold the house to us only moved a few blocks away. Probably, I'd say a quarter of a mile away. So I called Jim up on the phone. I said, Jim, just dug a box up in the front yard. It has rosary beads in it. Can you tell me anything about it? He said, listen, put them back. Put the beads back in the box and bury it where it is, and don't ask me any questions.
Whoa.
I said, okay, or it must be another Irish, blessing tradition or something. So I did what he said and put them back. Now, again, years later, I would come to understand what his concerns were. It was I had called him once, really after what the book details, and when we got into this big confrontation with this demonic entity, I called him on the phone. I said, "Hey Jim, I'd like to get together and talk to you sometime, and let's talk about the house." And we've experienced some strange situations and circumstances in the house. And with that, he said, let me get back to you.
Well, Bob,
and he hung up the phone.
When you bought the house, did they give you a look like better you than me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
see, that's...
No question. And, I think, in their defense, I think that whatever they did when they had Mass, when they buried the rosaries, and they probably buried a holy object like a rosary or cross or something in the four corners of the property.
Mm-hmm.
They probably thought, we've taken care of the problem. But you know what? It's time to leave anyway. They had just spent 9 years renovating the house, done a lot of work, and all of a sudden, bang, they're gone.
And it's not uncommon for renovation of a home to kick up some paranormal activity every now and again. From what I understand, as far as just mundane, normal stuff. Well, if you can ever call paranormal activity normal, that's why it's paranormal.
Yeah, that's not normal.
But as far as demonic, I have never heard of renovation. And I'm sure that's not what caused it.
No. There's a long story here that I investigated and discovered over a period of time. But this was not, I guess my point is that this was not a situation that was initiated or experienced just by us. Mm-hmm. It had existed in the house for decades, because not only did I know, obviously, what took place through happenstance, with the previous owners, I actually talked with a woman who was prior to them. And she was very forthcoming on what had taken place when she lived there.
Oh,
so this was something that went back, several decades, and wasn't just something that we experienced when we moved.
Yeah, it wasn't something new that just came up. It sounds like it had gone through generations. Sometimes they call them generations of owners.
Right.
And so, for everyone tuning in, just now, Bob, here, we're talking, you find a Sucrets box with the oddest object you would, I'm sure when you pulled that out of the ground, you had it must have shocked you. Why the heck is there rosary beads in this Sucrets box? And then to talk to the owners, the previous owners, and I'll get back to you. That had to have given you just a sinking feeling.
Well, again, initially, and I detail this whole, the whole process of events in order over a number of years. And again, my book, which is on Amazon now for pre-order, is called The Demon of Brownsville Road. I wrote this book primarily because through all this, not only the initial haunting piece, but as this demonic force eventually went on to attack my family, attack me, and really unmask itself. It's a story that I felt I had to tell because it's true, and it happened. We experienced it, and this whole idea of the supernatural and good and evil. That evil does exist apart from a person's evil intentions.
Well,
and yes.
Did you walk in? Obviously, I'm going to assume you walked into this not really believing in the paranormal.
Well, I certainly had seen the movie The Exorcist when I was a kid, and I've heard ghost stories, so to speak, but I had never personally experienced anything. And other than movies like the Amityville Horror and so on, the more well-known ones, I wouldn't say I didn't believe in it, but I had never experienced anything like that. So when you begin to actually be involved with situations where there is no rational, reasonable explanation, and certainly I looked for them because I didn't want to have a house that had issues with it and so on. But as time went on and over a period of years, this became more serious, and eventually became very terrifying and became very dangerous too. So it was real. The whole thing is real. It's true. Okay. And that's what that's why I wrote this book.
Well, I applaud you for writing the book. It could not have been easy to put pen to paper in such a situation. It had to have been extremely traumatic, not only for you but your family, and I'm sure that's a gross understatement.
Well, eventually people might think, okay, well, why didn't you just sell the house? As we began to understand more and more what was going on, and I did consider that. In fact, when I eventually, who do you look to for help in a situation like that? When you're really involved in a serious situation where this paranormal activity is taking place on a regular basis, and it's no longer a curiosity. You can tell it's dangerous. I mean, it became very, very ominous and threatening. So we at the time, and I'm, just to be factual here, we weren't Catholic at the time. We were evangelical Christians, and I went to the pastor of our church. My sons were really being affected by this evil by that point, and we had already been dealing with him from a family perspective for family counseling and so on. And I told him that this situation in the house, I really felt, went deeper than adolescent rebellion. There's something really evil taking place. There's an evil feeling in the house, and then when it began to manifest itself, I said, I need help. Well, what are you going to do? Who do you call? It's not like, you call Dan Aykroyd and
Exactly.
Bill Murray, the Ghostbusters, and they bring their ambulance over with, their ray guns, or, it's humorous, but you can't do that.
No, unfortunately, there is no one out there that can do that.
Yeah, so what do you do? I was a fairly, I was a high-level politician in the area. I was out of office by then, but I was still good friends with the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. I mean, close personal friends. And I had told him what was taking place, and he said to me, I'm going to go see the bishop. The Catholic bishop of Pittsburgh at the time was a man by the name of Donald Worrell. He has since gone on to become a cardinal, and he's the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Anyway, he went and saw the bishop and came back to me and said that a priest is going to contact you like tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, he's going to call you up. So I went home and waited for the phone to ring, and sure enough, one of the bishop's leading staff members called me. I had met him in the past, and we had a very frank and businesslike conversation. And it wasn't at all as I thought, where someone is skeptical or they maybe think you're crazy. It was very businesslike. In fact, he seemed to know about the house already.
Interesting. So he called you up. Like, if I were to call you up, let's just say, Bob, you said, hey, I think my place is haunted. I would be a bit taken aback. But these individuals, like you explained, this is what they do. This is
that's right.
It's like a mechanic telling you about your alternator that's bad in your car. They come across just matter-of-factly.
Yes. So it was very businesslike. And he told me that night, and just to come back to the previous point I wanted to make, he said, okay, you have a decision to make, and you don't have to make it right now, but you have two choices. You can sell this house and move your family away and be done with it, or you can stay and we're going to try to deal with this. And this was the most alarming thing that he said. He said, in a year, we'll know if we're making progress.
A year?
Whoa.
That's what
Whoa.
I said.
So
I thought, okay, they're going to come in, team of priests, old priests, young priests.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to do the Catholic hocus pocus. You know, at the time, that's how I looked at it. You know, say some Latin prayers, donuts and biscuits.
Yeah. Get your Hollywood
and
ending.
it's going to be okay, and they're going to leave. Well, that wasn't the case. It was almost like the scene in The Matrix. Take the red pill or the blue pill.
oh boy.
And so I said, okay, we're in, because I really, by that time, I knew how serious it was, and I realized what had been done to us. And I couldn't, in my right, you know, with my own conscience, try to sell this house to some other family and move away.
Well, yeah. I mean, how can you, in good faith, hand the keys to a family that possibly has small children? Well, here you go. Here's the house. Here's a great.
Hey, it's great house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, we'll take. What do you want to give us?
Exactly. So go ahead.
Okay, so Bob, what was the first violent type of thing that this demonic thing did to your family that made you say, this is dangerous?
Great
Ooh, can we save that for the other side of the break? We're up against a hard break, so we got to leave right now.
Ooh, stay tuned.
But stay tuned, and he's going to answer that.
Yeah.
Guy, I mean, it's not like his family set out like we're playing with the occult or doing this or doing that.
Right.
And Bob, for everyone that's just tuning in, he is the author of The Devil of the Brownsville Road. And
The Demon.
Demon,
The
sorry.
Demon.
Oh, I knew I was going to screw that up at least one time. It's The Demon of the Brownsville Road. And we are discussing it with Bob tonight. And it's been one of those, like I said, one of those interviews that's actually really tough to do because it's a scary thing. It really is.
Yeah.
You know,
And we ended, we had to go to commercial break, of course, and we were talking about, I had asked Bob, what is the first thing that happened to him or his family that was so dangerous that it just made you say, okay, we need help. We can't keep on doing this.
So let me harken back a little bit to our first months in the house, and then I'll move forward from there, because another very telling, dramatic event took place that at the time, again, didn't realize, but as happens in long drawn out developing situations, you have certain instances that take place and you don't really realize their significance at the time until later when more and more things happen. So we move in there for a month or so, and my mother, who was Catholic, said to me, she called me Bobby, Bobby, you need to have your house blessed. And again, I said, okay, if that'll make you happy. It sounds nice. So she says, I'll have a priest from my church, her church, the Catholic church there in the community, come. We'll arrange, and he'll do a formal blessing of your house. Mm-hmm. So I was happy to do that. It's a very nice man came. He was a priest, as I recall, from India, this country of India. He was an Indian priest, and he started going through the house and blessing with holy water each room, and we were on the second floor doing all the bedrooms. And again, it was a very lighthearted, nice feeling. So we go down the hallway to one of the main bedrooms in the front of the house. And it's a bedroom that we had given to my oldest son, who was 3 years old at the time. I had a 4-year-old daughter, a 3-year-old son, a 2-year-old son, and a newborn son.
So young family.
Yes. So he had this big room that we put him in. I mean, big bedroom. 10-foot ceilings, walk-in closet. So he wouldn't sleep in his bed. We would find him sleeping with his blanket on the floor in the closet, and there was a light in the closet every night with the light on. He wouldn't sleep in his bed. And we thought, well, new big house, he's scared.
Yeah.
Right, he's being a kid.
My wife finally just got a crib mattress and put it in the closet, and that's where he slept. So we're going down the hall, blessing the rooms, and all of a sudden we get to his room. Now, mind you, he's with us. It's like a little procession. He gets in front of his door, puts himself in the form of an X. 2 hands, 2 feet on the door jambs in front of the door. 3-year-old boy. And the priest is there, and he says, you can't come in this room. And
really,
I was just flabbergasted.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Bobby, move out of the way. He can't come in this room. You're not coming in my room. So it was going to be a little confrontation there, and the priest obviously just said, okay, that's okay. Put a little water on the closed door and on him and moved on. Again, a strange event.
Was that out of character for your son?
Completely.
Okay.
Completely.
Okay.
But his character began to change sleeping in that room. Later on, I found out the previous owners, not the people who we bought that were there for a relatively short time, a few years, sold the house to us, but the previous owners who had been there for like 40 years didn't use that room as a bedroom. There was as we would come to find later on, some things that had taken place in that room that was evil.
Okay.
What kind of things, if you don't mind me asking?
We can move forward a little bit.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so his personality started to become very introverted. He wasn't a happy-go-lucky little boy anymore. It was just, and again, not understanding at the time, he's in that bedroom, probably for a year, sleeping on the floor in the closet. So a few years go by, and we were doing some renovation in the master bedroom. My wife wanted me to, we were changing a number of things. So we took Bobby out of that room he was in and put him in a smaller bedroom, and her and I moved in that room.
Okay.
That became our bedroom for a number of months, because what I was doing in the master bedroom was involved, and I would work on it at night, and it involved a whole number of things. It took me months to finish.
Any father, not to interrupt you, would do that, though. You guys, a child that's scared of a room, and you know, I mean, we have kids, so I mean, I would definitely do the same thing you did.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then it starts to affect my wife. She changes over a period of time, probably about a year. She eventually gets to the point, and again, she's in her early 30s. Young, beautiful, effervescent, nice, happy woman. We're sleeping in that bedroom. She finally has what amounts to a nervous breakdown.
Oh, boy.
Ends up several weeks in the psychiatric ward in one of the hospitals in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
Again, at the time, I didn't realize what was going on. It was that room.
Yeah.
So that when to answer your question, it began to surreptitiously and subtly attack certain members of my family mentally. It eventually concentrated not only on my wife, but then really focused in on my oldest son and my youngest son. the son who was a newborn when we moved in. Later on, as they grew older, and this thing really began to work on them, it affected them mentally, to the point where they were under doctor's care. They were in and out of psychiatric hospitals. It was a serious situation.
It was being a predator, is what it was doing.
Absolutely. And again, at the time, until this all kind of blew up in my face, this went on for a number of years. In the 1990s, I got involved in politics, and it was a fairly high-level position in Pennsylvania, so I was gone a lot. And while I was gone, this thing was doing its work. When I left office in the year 2000, and we had been in the house, 11 years or so, and I came back, that's when it really started to focus and become much more ominous. And then it developed on from there, as it unmasked itself.
So do you feel, Bob, do you think it was gaining strength by attacking, I don't want to say the weaker members of the family, but do you think that's how it was gaining more and more strength to manifest more and more by using those people's energy over the course of years?
Well, people will say, well, why did it take so long to get so serious? Well, I think these things as eternal beings have no sense of time. They work and they do what they do in their own schedule.
Well, that's all they have is time.
That's right. I think it was slowly building a surrounding me, so to speak, because eventually I would become the focus of its attacks. What eventually happened was my oldest son, who was, I guess at the time he was 17 years old, 18 years old, the same one who had stood in the doorway and refused entry into his room, had become, it's hard to describe how his whole personality over a period of years had changed, and he became a very, very ominous, frightening personality.
Did he reach the level of maybe even violence?
Oh, well, that's what I'm getting to. At one point in time, one evening, he attacked me in the house, and by that time, he was my size. A fight broke out. My youngest son, whom also was kind of, as I said, a focus of this thing eventually, was involved. And it became a very, very traumatic situation where the police were involved, and I was arrested. And since I had been such a notable figure in Pittsburgh, it was all over the papers across the state.
I read that.
I can only imagine what that must have been like.
It was. It was. So I'm out of the house for several months, and finally we reconcile and go through counseling, and charges are dropped, and so on and so forth. And I show up back in the house, and I can tell you that while I was gone, I really contemplated whether I was going to go back again or not. It was a really traumatic thing, not only with my children and my wife and so on.
Right.
I thought, I don't know if I even want to go back there, but I did. And when I went back, and I was there for several weeks, is when the paranormal activity really ramped up, and as I say, it became really in your face. It unmasked itself. It was no longer being surreptitious. It was doing some pretty wild stuff. And at that point in time, I realized there was something seriously wrong in the house.
No, at this point you didn't. Did you consider the thought of a demon at this point?
No. I take that back, because one of the things I did, was I placed rosary beads in certain places in the house, and I was still not a Catholic, but I got them from my mother, and I thought, well, these are holy objects. Let's see what it does, and it would break them apart.
It would break the rosemary
beads. Yes.
Really, you would show up on scene and you would find these beads physically broken.
Okay, one time what I did. Okay, remember the light in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I had eventually done, because I couldn't stop that from happening, I took a heavy piece of wire and tied a very taut knot on the chain, and then ran that wire over to a coat hook and tied it on the coat hook, so that chain couldn't move unless those knots were untied.
Right.
So you made it so it couldn't be messed with.
Yeah. So later on, I took that wire off, and when and it seemed to be okay for a while, but when I came back, all of a sudden, that chain starts flying around again. I can remember one particular time. This was in December. I went to the closet and I put on my coat, and I started to leave the house, and I remembered I didn't have my gloves, so I went back to the closet, opened the closet. This was maybe a minute took place to get my gloves. And when I reached in, the chain was already wrapped around the light in that short period of time.
Wow.
Oh,
so,
my goodness.
I took rosary beads, and I actually tied rosary beads to that chain. I took the chain, made a knot, and tied the rosary beads to the chain. And I did that the next day, actually.
Uh-huh.
I put the rosary beads on, and we left the house. I came back, and the rosary beads were wrapped around the top of the light.
Oh, my
But I
goodness.
took them down, and within minutes, I came back, and the rosary beads were off the chain and hanging on the hook.
Oh, boy.
What?
So by that time, I'm thinking, this thing, it's interactive. This thing is happening. I'm doing stuff. It's happening within minutes.
It's screwing with you now at this point.
Really.
Oh, yeah.
It really was. So I guess the next really, I don't want to say impressive, but serious event that took place that really concerned me is that I came home from work the next week, walked into the kitchen, and on the countertop next to the sink was a CD, a music CD.
Mm-hmm.
And this music CD was probably in 30 different pieces. It was just shattered.
Wow.
Like I had taken, you would take a plate and throw it on the floor.
What CD
so
was
I said
it?
to my wife, what's with this?
Yeah, I would be thinking to myself, those CDs are hard to break. I mean, you hit them with a hammer.
Exactly. You take one of those and you try to, you can crack it, but they're durable.
Yeah, I've never been able to shatter one.
Yeah, they're durable. So I said, she goes, okay, get Bobby. And again, Bobby, he's back in that room again. So I said to him, okay, what's with the CD? He says, I don't know. I was in my room. I was standing by the door, and all of a sudden I heard a pop, a loud pop, out of the corner of the room across the other side of the room. I felt something go by my head, almost like a bullet, and then I hear this crash in the wall. And he said the CD was then laying all cracked up on it hit the wall, shot out of the corner, the other corner opposite to him, shot across the room, right by his head, hit the plaster wall. Now, it's not a wallboard, it was plaster, hard plaster wall.
Yep.
Hit that wall, that plaster wall, and it hit it with such force. You can imagine the force. It was like shot out of a gun, and it hit that wall and it shattered into pieces. and then he subsequently picked the pieces up and brought them downstairs. And he said, I hadn't seen the CD for a while, and I don't know what's going on, but this is pretty scary. And so that's, as those events began to multiply, that's when, as I had said earlier, I ended up going to the bishop of the Catholic diocese.
That's at that point you're like, enough. This is getting worse and worse and worse. We've gone way beyond a light bulb situation where it's messing with me in the closet. Now it's throwing things.
Yeah, and as I said, we were going to counseling as a result of the fight and so on with the pastor of our church. So this stuff is starting to happen in the house. We're still in counseling. I'm saying, listen, Pastor, there's some crazy stuff going on in the house, and this isn't good. It's taken, and again, I say rosary beads. He didn't pay any attention to rosary beads, but to me, it was significant.
No,
and it was taking on a more ominous and evil persona.
So now your son, did he spend a lot of time alone in this room? I mean, was he away from everybody?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That's I've heard that many, many times before on this radio show where I've interviewed other people that have had, I don't want to say similar, but they've had interactions with negative. I don't go so far to call it a demon, because I think that you got to go far and wide, as Bob, you've been told. You got to go far and wide before you can put the old demon stamp on it. But as far as negative goes, it seems like it likes to, like you said earlier, single people out. Get them away from everybody else. Make them go alone, and that's where it really seems to work on them.
Well, it did, and what I discovered, was that as we began to work, there were two priests assigned who would actually come to the house. Mm-hmm. Another, the more senior priest, I would talk to on the phone on a regular basis. And as we entered into this process of various types of blessings of the house, and holy water, and blessed salt, and incense, and mass, and all the Catholic rituals, and certain types of prayer and cleansing and so on, we would go through those events. They would come and spend several hours in the house. It didn't get any better; it got worse.
Well, like bear in mind earlier in the interview, the priest himself said, "We'll know in a year."
Yeah.
That's right, and I didn't want to believe him. I didn't want to believe him. I thought, okay, we're going to do this stuff. We're going to go through it, and we're going to fix it, because I do have a faith, a strong faith in God, and a strong faith that the name of Jesus is all powerful, and that evil retreats from it. Well, it was getting worse, and it began to its paranormal terroristic activity began to be much more focused. And
at any point, Bob, did you ever call maybe a paranormal investigation team in to maybe get some type of visual or audio evidence?
A year into it, the church was contemplating, and this is a long process. They were going to have a pretty famous exorcist from the Diocese of New York, whose name he's since deceased, Father James LaBarre, to bring him in. And not unlike a possession situation, they like to have outside, non-religious analysis to verify that what's taking place is, in fact, beyond reason.
Do their due diligence to make sure this is the real deal.
So again, who do you call? Well, they had heard about this paranormal research team at Penn State University. And they were a group of students and graduate students that, studied the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
So I contacted them, and this was before they were famous, because Ryan Buell and his group eventually went on years after our event to have their own television show and so on called Paranormal State. But at this point in time, they were still just novices and looking for things to investigate. So I contacted Ryan. He was the leader of the group. Adam Bly at the time was somewhat of a staff advisor. He was a he was a psychologist, and he came along with probably about 10 students one January weekend in early 2005. This all began in the beginning of 2004, so a year later, as the priest had predicted, things were still pretty bad. So they came beginning of 2005.
And so I suppose when they said, hey, we're going to put you in touch with a paranormal group to come in, were you skeptical when they had made that suggestion?
Well, no, I was, by that point in time, I was ready to try anything.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. What I mean by that is, did you in the back of your head say, I just want this thing out of my house?
That's right. And I thought, okay, if this is what we need to do, let's just do it.
Right.
So, and again, I welcomed these folks in to even verify my own sanity.
Mm-hmm.
That, okay, tell me that I'm not nuts.
Yeah, at least have somebody else there to say, hey,
that's
Bob,
right.
You're not
so they
crazy.
come in, very professional. They've got infrared cameras and infrared sensors and heat sensors and computers and, the whole deal. They wire the house up. They have a command center. They have, speakers. They're talking to each other throughout the house. They're on walkie-talkies. I mean, it was an impressive thing they all set up. They had people stationed everywhere and video cameras, and they said, okay, you can go to bed. We're going to stay up and see what we find. So,
but we got to go to break.
Okay.
We're going to hit break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Bob about his encounter with Paranormal State right after this. Glad you could come back to us because, wow, we are hitting some suspense here. Because
yes, we are.
Oh, yeah, when we left, Bob was talking about having Paranormal State, of some fame. They had a TV show come in. This is before they were famous.
Right.
Come in and help verify what's going on, and also be there for his family. And like Bob even said, tell me I'm not crazy.
Oh, yeah, because something like that could make you feel like you're going nuts.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know how I would handle all this that's going on without saying, okay, I'm selling the house. See you later. Here's the keys. Hey, have a good time.
Yeah, I would have been gone a long time ago.
I commend Bob and his family for being tough and just hanging around and fighting because he could have given up so easily.
And he didn't.
And he didn't, Bob. I got to commend you right there. I mean, how easy would it have been just to give up?
Well, I have to give glory to God, because ultimately the only thing that kept me in place was my faith that ultimately, good God overcomes evil.
Mm-hmm.
And that would eventually happen. But I can tell you that first year, as things got progressively worse, and this thing began to manifest itself in ways where I could tell I was in its presence. Now, it would appear in different forms and different shapes that different members of the family. It would range from a black shape to a black cloud that would move. My one son, David, my middle son, saw it as as almost in a bodily form. It was somewhat of a contorted bodily form, but he was looking into the kitchen one Saturday morning through the dining room from a room that we call the TV room, and he saw this black shape standing in front of the sink.
Oh, boy.
And my wife and I were in the kitchen at the time, Saturday morning, having coffee, and all of a sudden he walks into the kitchen and he said, "Who was that?" And I looked at him, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Who was just standing right here in front of the sink, and all dressed in black?" And I said, "David, I have no idea what you're talking about." He said, "It moved into the kitchen as I walked towards it." So it would appear in different shapes to different people in different ways, but the way it would manifest itself to me on a daily basis after a period of time was that it emanated this terrible sulfuric stench. And I say it was a mix between a sulfuric smell and a burning rubber.
And that is not uncommon when you're dealing with a negative or a demonic presence.
I've heard that is kind of a hallmark signature of a strong demonic force.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when to describe this to the listeners, you'd be in a room and it would not permeate the entire room. Say if I sprayed air freshener or had roses in the room and you could smell them across the room. No, you could only smell this stink, this stench. If you could compare it to, being next to someone that had really bad breath or very bad body odor, you would smell that when you were standing next to them, but it certainly shouldn't, encompass the whole room.
Yeah.
It would move with the entity. So it would be in these rooms, at two separate bedrooms. It basically took over, and this stench would occupy these rooms. So my wife and I would, and again, this is a daily practice that we would learn to deal with this thing and what we called its antics. What it would do, it would possess a room, and we would go in and we would say the rosary. We'd have holy water. Would have blessed candles, and I would hit this thing with holy water. I could see where it was just from smelling it.
Yeah.
So if I'm in front of it, I can smell it. I would sprinkle it with holy water, and it would move.
Yeah, it would run away from it.
Exactly.
Wow.
And then we would walk through the room. I'd locate it again. I'd hit it again. This would go on for several hours.
And I got to ask you, to kind of backtrack a little bit, what evidence did the folks from Paranormal State uncover during this investigation?
Okay. What I was trying to do, what I'd like to do, because this story is so long.
It's like an onion. I'm noticing, layers. I mean, it's like
to set it up right,
to
demonstrate or to describe to you and your listeners what took place that first year, up until the time when Paranormal State came, because it manifested so many different terror tactics, from leaving puddles of what looked to be blood-like substance on the floor. It would go through and move furniture. It would take pictures and turn them sideways on the wall. It'd like to take our wedding picture in our bedroom off the wall and put it on the floor. On a regular basis, daily basis, it would do these things.
You were experiencing every day what some people call high paranormal activity on a daily basis in this home.
Daily basis. Now, I will tell you that it would go in spurts. It would be real hot and heavy for about a week, and then for about another week, it would settle down. It was like this thing needed to recharge. But I will tell you some things that happened continuously, and that was its fixation on rosary beads. Now, I went through a process of prayer and a ritual that I was given, that I would pray in the morning before I left for work, and at night, after I got done dealing with this thing in the room and its stench, I would say the rosary out loud. In the one room, we vacated 2 bedrooms, Bobby's bedroom, and eventually what was the master bedroom. We moved the furniture out of those rooms because that's where it would seem to concentrate its activity. But when I would go to bed at night, I would either I would pray the rosaries, I'd set them on my nightstand, or in many cases I would fall asleep at night praying the rosary. Mm-hmm. Every morning I would wake up, and those rosary beads, for those that are familiar with rosary beads, there's 5 decades of 10 beads separated by individual beads, and you pray different prayers for each bead. And they're connected with a little, like, chain. It's a little chain. Each bead has several links between it. And they're small links and, clasped together. So I would wake up in the morning, and the beads, as you pray the big loop of beads, they would be meticulously put together. The links of the chains would be fused together to form what appeared to be little figure eights. Okay, they would be joined together in 3 or 4 places, so you could no longer effectively pray them because the chain was together. And I would have to I had a little pair of jeweler's pliers, and I would have to actually bend the links apart, take them apart, bend the links back together again, and this happened on a consistent basis. It would mangle the cross on the rosary beads. We all wore crosses, some crucifixes, some just standard flat golden crosses. It would bend the crosses. In one case, broke the chain, bent the cross, folded the cross completely upon itself.
Do you think
to the point where when I pulled the cross, tried to straighten it out again, it broke.
Wow, man. I mean, every time. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer. Oh. My mind is just...
Do you think that it would have been worse if you weren't doing what you were doing?
Well, my feeling was that what we were doing was making life uncomfortable for this thing as well. It didn't want me to pray the rosary, thus it fused the rosaries together. One of the other things that we did, and again, we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. I was looking for things to do to put a stick in this thing's eye.
Yeah,
right.
Make it uncomfortable, make it not
exactly.
Stay.
So the movie, and again, this is we're getting into the area of faith and religion, but the movie, The Passion of the Christ, which is a very, very obviously controversial but very popular movie that very graphically describes and depicts the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ and his eventual victory over the devil.
That movie touched me so
we
deeply.
We set that movie up in one of the bedrooms, a DVD player, television set. We put that movie on, and we put it on repeat, and it played 24 hours a day for about 6 months in that particular room. And I would come in at various times, several times a week. The television would be turned off. The DVD player would be turned off. I'd come in, and the DVD would be taken out of the player and would be sitting on top of the TV or sitting on the bed. It didn't like that movie. So certainly I was going to keep playing it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, we found something you don't like. Here we go.
And we played that movie until literally the DVD player just flat wore out.
Yeah.
But I think just to comment for a moment on that movie, I mean, it was a powerful movie. It was a controversial movie. I think what happened to Mel Gibson as a result of making that movie, I don't think he personally realized the backlash that there would be from it.
I don't think he did either, to be honest.
And it was powerful. So we did that. So we're pushing back. We're fighting back. The whole time it's doing, it's crazy, all the stuff, the blood, the puddles. I remember one night I detail in the book, I wake up in bed, and I'm completely turned around in bed. My feet, I'm under the blankets, my feet are on my pillow, and I'm at the foot of the bed.
It flipped you around.
It flipped me around. You would think, okay, you just got out of bed and got back in. No, you don't do. No, I didn't. I didn't get out of bed. I was flipped around in bed. I'd wake
I've
up,
woken up like
and
that
all
before.
the change that on my dresser, all the coins would be standing on end. It just like to mess with me to say, let me know I was here. I was screwing with your rosaries.
Yep.
I was here.
Oh.
So it was a mental game it was playing on a regular basis, and what I found was that we did, and this again was advice of the priest and so on, was to tell it, to laugh at it, to say, you're not impressing me, and whenever I would speak at it, I always would preface my statements in the name of Jesus Christ. So it wasn't me as a human being trying to take on this supernatural creature, but I was calling supernatural protection upon myself to confront it.
You want to make it feel about 2 inches tall.
Yeah, and so we would say, go watch the movie. You're not impressing me, and guess what? We're not leaving. You're going to leave eventually. You're going to leave now. You're going to leave later, but we're not leaving. So you can do all these things you want. So then it began to scratch us. It would, I'd wake up in the morning and my chest would be scratched, my back would be scratched, and they would be not scratches like you think you take your fingernails and scratch yourself at night. These were very fine. Generally, always in a set of 3, almost like a cat scratch, a very fine, thin scratch, but it would be not 3 inches long. Like it would start under in one case, start under my right ear, and went all the way down across my chest.
Wow!
In chest, and I had on. Pajamas.
Yeah.
So it was underneath my pajamas, and that was again a regular occurrence.
You had to have felt just threatened and violated.
We did, and both my wife and my son, one of my sons, experienced puncture wounds, bite marks, and my one son in one of his. When we had to have him committed to the hospital, he had been bitten on the stomach, and a doctor examined it and looked and said, it's a dog bite. Well, it wasn't. No dog bit him. It was on his stomach. It was a bite mark, and he had been bitten by this thing.
Wow.
So, anyway, those are the types of things that took place, the first year prior to the paranormal state folks coming.
Gosh,
so when I said
Bob.
after a year we weren't making any progress, it seemed it was a living hell.
And then you said this is the first year before you had the paranormal state folks come in. I cannot. You are experiencing probably the most horrible thing I have maybe ever heard in an interview.
Right.
And how you kept your sanity during the whole thing, how your family kept together. A lot of times this stuff busts apart families. It doesn't bring them
that's
together.
what just about happened. And what really, I think, my wife's mental state broke down completely again, and my sons were. I mean, it was bad. I mean, my youngest son was cutting his wrist with a razor blade, and it's called the cutting. You know, they were doing we had to take them out of school. Now at the same time, though, I had another son. My daughter had since she was married and left, but my other son, my middle son, he would get scratched, but from a mental standpoint, it wasn't affecting him at all. He was just fine and lucid, and even was trying and wanted to volunteer to help me deal with this thing and to help us.
That's almost
help the priest.
That's almost more disturbing. You know, for him to be just not even affected by that going on. As a father, that would alarm me immensely.
Well, I'm not saying he wasn't affected. He wasn't being affected mentally like the other two were.
Sure.
He was still normal and lucid.
It wasn't targeting him as much as it was
exactly.
the others.
Yeah.
So,
Gotcha.
what happened, I think, to really culminate the situation, where I said I felt like I was knocked out and down for the count, so to speak. One of the things the priests did on a regular basis is they would go through the house with a vessel, like a little vase in it with a handle on it, filled with holy water. And a priest generally has an instrument that dips in the holy water, takes some of the water out, and then it's thrown in droplets to bless rooms or people or, you know, whatever you want to bless.
Yeah.
So they would go through the whole house and bless the walls and the ceiling and just sprinkle that holy water all over the house, and at times took incense through. Well, if you can imagine taking that same holy water container and filling it with a dark brown, reddish liquid, and it didn't do the whole house at one time. It started on the third floor and eventually made its way down to the second floor and the third floor. But I came home one day to go up. The house had been empty, third floor. The third floor is like a separate servant's apartment or a maid or separate living quarters. And I had actually moved up there at this point in time. And I walked up the steps, and I see this liquid in droplets all over the walls, like someone had taken the holy water container and just strewn this stuff all over the walls up onto the ceiling. So it wasn't exactly, the walls weren't bleeding as it was seeping out of anything. Yeah. This stuff was thrown there. And eventually that liquid made its way in droplet form down to the second floor, down to the first floor, and through the dining room into the kitchen. So this entity was going through the house at different times, claiming its dominance and ownership of the house.
Doing reverse of what you guys were doing, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. That Bob, every bell and whistle must have went off in your head like, oh boy.
Here we go.
Yeah.
It is time.
So I can tell you, when that happened, that was so dramatic. When it began to cover the walls of the house and claim it, I got a renewed, vigorous determination to say, we're going to fight this thing.
It's on. It's on now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like pulling yourself up on the ropes, okay, we're going to go another round.
Yeah, you might be in the 12th round of Mike Tyson, but you know what? I'm ready for the 13th.
Exactly.
Kind of
So that's when the Penn State folks come. So I said all that to set up when the Penn State folks came. So I had gone through all that. The blood was on the walls, and Ryan Buell and Company with Adam Bly came to the house. And that's what they walked into.
Mm-hmm.
So how much time do we have before we have a break?
We have 5 minutes before I have to hit my next break.
Okay, so they come in, and they had spoken with some type of, I don't know if you want to call it psychic or mystic, about this house they were going to investigate. And when this psychic tuned in, initially she was going to come with them.
Mm-hmm.
And once they told her where they were going and the house, she did whatever she does. And she said, you know what? I'm not going to that house. No. She said, but I will tell you, when you go there, you have to find the void in the middle of the house.
The void?
You have to find the void in the middle of the house because that's where it's at. And that's what she told them.
It's like its lair. That's where it's hanging out.
Exactly. So they came in, and they came that Friday night, said that's the next Saturday all day. They said, okay. I forget what her name was. Julie. Her name was Julie.
Mm-hmm.
And she was from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They said Julie, who was going to come and then decided that she didn't want to get involved, said that we needed to find the void. What do you think she's referring to? Well, the closet with the light is basically in the center of the house on the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a large wooden staircase that goes up so many steps, and then there's a landing. It turns to the left, and then goes up 17 steps altogether. So underneath that staircase, was an open void that was closed off completely from the time the house was built. And it was a large area. And to access that area, I actually went into the closet where the light was and took a saw, cut through the plaster.
Oh boy, Bob!
Through the plaster, and there was that was lath board. The individual boards. So behind the plaster is wood. There's a big mess, and cut a hole in the wall, and exposed this little room. I mean, it was large enough you could just about, not quite stand up in it. I'm 6 feet tall, so it was over 5 feet high in there, and it was, a slope down because of the steps. It was a large area in there, and I said, "This is the void. This is the only void that exists, and it's in the center of the house."
When you're cutting into that wall, I can only imagine what was going through your mind. You know, what am I going to find? Kind of.
That's right.
I'm getting
so
goosebumps.
we open up the wall, and it had been closed off for 80-some years since the house was built. And yet, now I looked in, and Ryan and Adam actually went in as paranormal investigators with lights on their foreheads and so on, and you wouldn't believe the things they found.
We're going to go ahead and go to break. Before we reveal that, just to bring everyone back up to speed, is on the scene. They're cutting through a hole in the wall where this void is. They enter. Bob, what happens?
Okay, so what we begin to find, or what appears, strange things, okay? They find several playing cards. They find Lego toys that belong to my youngest son. Now, remember, this is an area that's completely walled off. There are no cracks. There are no crevices. The only thing is the floor of this area over the years. It's above the furnace room. It had let coal dust up through the cracks, so it was dirty in there, but it was closed off.
How did the Legos get there?
They come out with Lego toys. Now, how could Lego toys get in this area? It's closed. It had, stale air, 80-some years old.
And you had to use a Sawzall to get in there.
Yeah, it was in there. Another odd thing they found was a large, probably the size of a golf ball, a piece of amber. Now, as they brought that amber out and we looked at it, this thing was valuable too. And as I studied, amber apparently through the years, the centuries, millennia, has been known to ward off spirits.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe someone in this house at one point in time had this piece of amber as a protection. And it ended up in this space. We found also, amongst other things, I think the most ominous piece of information was a crumbled up piece of paper that when we took it out and spread it out, on one side it was a drawing that the original owner of the house had drawn with a pencil and signed it, and it was a picture of his wife and what appeared to be his wife's mother or his mother standing in the backyard. He was a pretty good artist, standing in the backyard, looking out over the valley behind the house and looking at a beautiful sunset.
Mm-hmm.
That was crumpled up, and on the reverse side of that was some very, very disturbing descriptions of, like, it showed a man that kind of resembled the owner of the house smoking a cigar with a snake coiled up behind his head, ready to strike him. And then there was another picture drawn of a pig's head. And it seemed to me like, and we thought as we looked at this, that it was possibly some kind of a curse that was maybe one of the workmen or something in the house had seen this drawing of this delightful, happy scene and taken it and cursed it and crumbled it up and thrown it in this space to act as some ongoing, evil eye type curse on the house. So, again, these things began to add up, but we found that in there as well. So I would say that after we cut that hole open that night, kind of all hell broke loose in the house.
Oh yeah, you outed it. You outed it. You found where it lived.
Yeah, for the paranormal state folks, and I would say a couple of the group left and never came back again.
Oh,
because they came back a second time, and a number of them didn't come back.
Yeah.
And what the paranormal group recorded and experienced that night, and I don't want to give a whole lot away because I did write a book.
Well, that's true.
Right.
The Demon of Brownsville Road. Give it another plug.
That's right. You can buy to Amazon pre-order.
We really go into detail what they experienced, what they recorded, how they were affected mentally as well. When they came back the second time, which would be in February of 2005, it was so ominous for them at that point in time and what took place. Adam Bly himself was scratched like I was scratched so many times across my chest and my back. He was scratched right across the forehead with those same 3 scratch marks, and they actually bled.
Whoa. Well, I can just imagine these people running by Bob, going, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh," and Bob's like, "You kids ain't seen nothing yet."
That's right. So
stay here a week.
I would have to say that for whatever that space was, our breaking into it was a turning point in the battle, because its power began to eventually weaken after that.
You outed it. I mean,
Yeah.
like we talked about, you broke into its lair.
It's, and I used to think this thing, it's not all powerful. It's not like God. It has to be, even though it's supernatural, at a certain place at all times. So where did it go when I said it would be very active for 4, 5, 6 days, and then for a number of days things would seem normal? Where was it at when things were not active? And once we cut into that space, it seemed like from that point forward, it was another year, but we slowly were then making progress.
Yeah.
It was like we lanced a boil.
Yep.
We opened up the infection. And this all sounds so bizarre and so almost, extraordinary or just unbelievable, but I can tell you, I couldn't make this story up. I just couldn't make it up, and even in the way it ended, which was not so impressive. There was no great
It went out with a
thunderclap
whimper.
or anything.
Went out with a
Had
whimper.
I made it up, I certainly would have given it a more impressive ending.
Yeah, it went out with a whimper rather than a bang.
Exactly. I like to compare it to, or I compare it to a blazing fire that slowly just burn itself out.
I just wonder how long this thing was hanging around.
Well, one of the things that we discovered, and there was always speculation of maybe it wasn't just the house, and there were evil things that took place in the house during the 1920s, but evil seemed to gravitate to this house and to this land.
Mm-hmm.
And what I eventually found out was, as we investigated more, not only the construction of the house and the owners of the house and what took place in the house, but even prior to that, in the front yard, there's a very, very big, large oak tree that's several hundred years old. I mean, it's almost 12 feet in diameter. And that oak tree, as we were told by neighbors and local lore, said that there was always something significant about that oak tree. People had different stories. Some relate, everything has to do with some point in time where George Washington was there and so on.
Wow.
And the road, Brownsville Road itself, is a very historic road. It had originally been an Indian trail, but it was at one time the main road to Pittsburgh from all points south. And Pittsburgh initially had started out as a British fort, Fort Pitt. And the town that grew up around the fort was Pittsburgh. Initially, really, it was a French fort that the British took over and built Fort Pitt. Well, Brownsville Road saw a lot of activity through the colonial years, and after the colonial years, and the United States was formed after the Revolution, and people started to migrate into Ohio. Prior to that, the British had a treaty with the Indians that settlement would not go west of the Allegheny Mountains. But after the United States was formed, that treaty was off. Well, the Indians never agreed to the Peace Treaty of Paris, and all of a sudden all these settlers started coming into what they felt was their land, and they weren't happy. And the first really major crisis that the new government had to form or deal with, and Washington was president, was called the Great Northwest Indian War.
I remember. Yep, I remember reading about that.
So the Indians, the Native Americans, I should say, began to force those who were trying to settle Ohio and even Indiana, which eventually they went to. They were pushing them back, so that Pittsburgh and the Monongahela River Fort Pitt had been abandoned. It was reconstituted again and garrisoned again. That was the frontier. So the raids came as far east as Pittsburgh as they drove the new settlers back again. And I was told by a woman who said, "I know the story about your tree. Actually, there are 4 people, a mother and her 3 young daughters, who are buried in your yard beneath the tree or
Really?
next to the tree. And they were massacred in a raid by the Indians. And the father, who was gone, came and found his family killed, buried them there, and planted this young sapling oak tree there as a memorial to them." So I thought that was an interesting story, and I investigated it,
Yeah.
went into the National Archives, the War Department, and in fact found a letter written by the commander of Fort Pitt to the Secretary of War that discussed specifically the story that I had been told about a mother and her 3 children being killed by the Indians in March of 1792.
So you found evidence to support the story.
The letter. Yeah, I
Yeah.
found a letter. So I then subsequently had a company that does ground penetrating radar,
I was just
commercial
about to ask
company that goes into a construction site to see what pipes and what's buried under the ground, and they scanned this area of my front yard in front of the tree, and came back with a report that said, yes, this area of, I forget the exact dimensions, was excavated at one time, and showed me where there were 4 horizontal figures, 4 to 6 feet under the ground. So it's grave. It's there.
Yeah, with things that would be consistent with a grave.
Exactly. So you have that happen. You have that evil that was associated with this terrible murder, and evil that prompts people to do evil things. I'm not blaming the Native Americans, because there were certainly things perpetrated on them as well. But I think the evil associated with this, maybe the land had some special significance to the Native Americans, that particular piece of land. But anyway, I think the evil clung to it and eventually infected the house that was built there.
What kind of evil things since then, without giving away too much, of course, because I'm sure all that is in the book, what kind of evil goings on were happening?
Well, we found also evidence that during the 1920s, when or the 20s or into the 30s during the Depression, the folks who built the house eventually lost it for taxes. So they had money issues. And what we found was that there was a doctor who rented a room, one particular bedroom on the second floor, for a number of years to practice his illicit trade of illegal abortions.
Oh, Bob, that's a whole lot of bad mojo going on there.
That's a whole separate situation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that bedroom happened to be the famous bedroom that my son slept in and we slept in, and it just all kind of started to come together.
It was just
so you had all this stuff built up, and I know that people are going to be saying, "Well, what? How can you prove this?" Believe me, I did my homework. And I was able to verify a lot of information and uncover it as to what took place there. And no matter what you think of that practice, if you think it's good or right or wrong, it's still death.
Exactly. Whether you're for or against, and that's, really neither here nor there, at this point in time. But yes, it's still death. You're absolutely correct, Bob. I agree with you.
So you have children, whether it's the children who were killed in the front yard, you have children that were killed in the bedroom, in the bathroom. Remains were sometimes burned in the furnace. I would come down in the mornings. Interestingly enough, it's a big old house. I put a wood burner in the basement to help supplement the heat. I'd come down in the morning to check the fire. And this is even before I realized anything. Back in the day when we thought this curious activity was going on in the house, I would find all the lights on in the basement, and there would be a chair sitting in front of the wood burner, right in front of the wood burner, like someone was sitting there to watch it burn. And as I later discovered that in some late-term abortions, the remains would be burnt in the furnace.
Oh, boy.
And,
no.
so you had a lot of kind of, as you said, evil mojo going on there that all built up, and eventually, targeted my children.
Yeah.
It was all about children.
So
All about children.
did you find out what this entity or who this entity actually was?
Well, the entity in the house was a demon.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a ghost. It was not, some lost, disembodied soul. It was a demonic presence. Just from the, reaction to holy objects, its desecration of holy objects, the power that it had, its tactics of throwing, this blood on the wall and all. It was an evil entity.
Go ahead, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
I guess that what I wanted to say, which I am very bad with words, and everybody knows it, is usually, a demonic presence or, a demon, they usually have some sort of, identity on who they were.
Yeah,
a name,
once you find the name out, you can take power over that entity and cast it out, is what we have been told.
Yeah, and I was just wondering if you had found out on who this demon was, if this demon had a name or if it was...
Well, we eventually came to believe, and we came across a name, Moloch. And interestingly enough, there was a god in the Old Testament, a god of the Canaanites called Moloch. And Moloch would be worshipped by the sacrificial death of babies would actually be burned to Moloch, burned in small vases before this god. So that's the name that came up, was Moloch.
So what's your... Wow. I've heard of this before. I've heard of that.
Yeah, if you find out the name.
No, I've heard the name Moloch, like Bob had said. So you're not saying it was the god or demigod or whatever god they chose, Moloch. That just happened to be this particular demon's name.
Well, yeah, if it was or wasn't, I don't know. But I know it was a powerful. It was a powerful entity, because at one point in time, it was a summer afternoon. Things had been particularly harrowing for a few days, and Father Mike came to the house. My wife and I were there to say Mass during the afternoon. I actually came home from work. My wife had to quit her job through this, so she was home. And we were upstairs in one room, and he was celebrating Mass. And as he was performing the holiest part of the Mass, the consecration, where Catholics believe that the bread and wine is actually transformed in the body and blood of Jesus Christ, the stench was right beside me during that Mass. And to me, that's about as in your face as you can get. It was telling me, you know what? I'm so powerful, I can be here.
That's a direct slap right to your face.
You go ahead and have all Mass. Oh, you know what? I'll attend Mass with you. That's what it
Wow.
means to me.
Oh, that's just bad.
And since you've broken the story, came out, wrote the book, have you found some resistance in people saying, Bob, that's a crazy story?
Well, it's hard to say because people haven't read the story yet. I'm surprised. The book is still in publishing, and they finished the cover of the book, which is particularly ominous looking, and they put it up for sale on Amazon. So when they put it up for sale on Amazon, the publisher did. All of a sudden, we start getting inquiries for it. And I figured, well, people want to know about it. We did a little website, and then my son put it on Facebook. From that point, it's just gone viral.
Yeah, I heard about it through a friend that interviewed you, and we talked at length about the interview. And it's like he told me, he says, this isn't just an interview, this is actual, it really happened. And him and I, we both have what we like to call BS detectors in the business. And I said, well, did they go off? And he says, not once. Not once the BS detector go off. And I said, well, you know what? I'd love to talk to Bob. I'd love to have him on the show. I'd love to hear from his own words what's going on. And I got to say, hearing you tell this story, I say story, I don't mean that derogatory at all, as in I don't believe. But hearing you tell this story, my hat is even more off to you that you were able to come through it, that your family was able to come through it.
And we live in the house.
And you stayed in the house.
Well, let me just, since we're running out of time, but I do want to make a statement about why I did this and why I wrote this book and why I felt really compelled to tell this story, because I can tell you writing the book was the easy part. Getting it published was much more difficult. Maneuvering my way through the publishing business, it was difficult. Mm-hmm. But I didn't need to write this book from the standpoint of, I'm really not impressed with television interviews or radio interviews. I mean, the time I was in politics, I was a influential, powerful politician. I had a organization, 7,000 plus employees and a $750 million budget. I was on television on almost a daily basis.
Yeah.
So this is nothing new to me. I've met presidents, I've met prime ministers. I'm not looking for fame. I've done all that.
Right.
I did all that. But and plus too, I came out of that with a fairly good, solid reputation as a guy who got things done, and a nice legacy to have for your life. But I experienced all of this insanity,
mm-hmm.
and I think a good friend of mine who's an attorney who really was skeptical as to what was going on in the house when it happened, and he came a number of times, and he's in the book, and I can remember when he had this epiphany, when all of a sudden he realized, first time he walked in the house, he was like, "Hey, we came, we saw, we kicked ass."
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
A line from the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
And at one point in time, he said to me, "This is really happening. This is true." So that's the point.
Yep.
This is true. The supernatural, good and evil, it's all real. The whole thing about God and the devil, and as we learn as kids, it's true. No matter what people want to say, science, we got it all figured out. You live, you die, and that's it. No, we're surrounded by this invisible world of good and evil that are vying for us.
A guest of ours recently, Heidi Hollis, put it best: a secret war.
Yep.
Exactly. So I can write, I can describe it, and I feel, I was given this privilege to experience this, 1 foot in the 1 foot in the supernatural and 1 foot in the physical. My faith has become reality. I've experienced it. So I got to tell people. I got to tell this story from the mountaintop to just say, folks, I'm telling you, it's all for real. So when you hear about the guy who takes an AK-47 and goes into a school and kills 30 kids, it's not always mental illness.
Yeah.
It's evil.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'd like to...
Now for Interview 2 of your trick-or-treat doubleheader right here on After Hours AM. We interviewed Andrea Perron some time back, and we really got to hear about what really happened with the real story of The Conjuring. Not what we saw on film, but what really happened. Sit back, relax, enjoy Andrea Perron as she tells us the terrifying tale of the true Conjuring.
Just right along with me.
Eric Olson. You know, I've heard it said many times, we have the world's greatest bumper music.
Well, I've heard that, and that is elliptical. That is the house band. That is
That
actually...
darn elliptical.
They're everywhere. You know,
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. What the
They're pervasive.
They are pervasive and
And
sometimes
ubiquitous.
Sometimes putrid. No, just kidding. That would be you.
It is me.
You're elliptical. So I mean, you know,
Yay.
that's Eric's tunes and
And we can't leave out Mike Crooker. So
No,
it's not
Mike-
just me, it was also Mike Crooker.
yes. But if you do want to hear the full tunes, get a hold of Mr. Eric Olson. I'm sure he'd be
Track me down.
happy to share those with you. But
I would.
wow, do we have a great guest tonight, Eric? And
Phantasma.
someone I've
Especially
wanted
in
to
light of
talk
your
to.
Tale. One of the few
Yeah.
really lengthy personal tales I've heard you tell.
Yeah, well, you know, I got a few, but that's the scariest one right there. I mean,
Very scary.
you know, after tangling with the demonic, the garden variety, quote unquote, garden variety haunting is nothing. I mean, nothing. I mean, you
Boring
know,
yawn.
well, no, not boring yawn. I mean, it's just
Yawn.
it doesn't have the peril. Yeah, I mean, the actual physical peril.
Can you imagine getting to the point where you were kind of addicted to that level of danger?
Oh, I started getting addicted to that house. I found myself wanting to go there all the time.
I bet.
I couldn't stay away, and finally I'm like, why am I going to this haunted location?
Softly drawn.
I would be there in the middle of the night by myself, sitting in the living room for no apparent good reason.
I would say at that point you'd say, this is not having a good effect on
Yeah,
me.
exactly. But anyhow, we
Anyhow.
got to move on. We got a huge. I've always wanted to talk to her.
Huge. She's monstrous. She's as big as the Trump Towers. No, but she is very large, for sure, within the paranormal community. Andrea Perron is the author of the trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light. These books chronicle the childhood she shared with the dead and living alike in a colonial-era farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island during the 70s, a.k.a. The Conjuring House. Born in 1958, at the age of 12, her parents purchased the old Arnold estate, beginning an incredible odyssey beyond the realm of reality, as most perceive it to be. A collective memoir, the books detail the encounters experienced by every member of her family. 7 mere mortals spent a decade exploring the vast expanse of possibilities that exist beyond the 5 senses, employing the 6th for clarity. I love this bio. It proved to be an intriguing, horrifying, and enlightening endeavor. Each one of them was profoundly altered for life because of what they witnessed, the manifestations of the afterlife. Family finally left the barn behind in 1980, but it will never leave them. Welcome to the program, Andrea Perron. What a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be with both of you. And neither one of you will ever compare me to Donald Trump.
No.
Not Donald Trump, his tower.
Tower of power.
Towering figure. You tower above us.
I do. I tower above his measly tower, yes, which I've been in, by the way. I mean, there's such a thing as, if it can be done, it can be overdone. All that glitters is not gold. Oh, God. But don't get me going there.
Okay, we won't go there.
I shan't, because we have ourselves run up against that buzzsaw.
Yeah, on more than one occasion, I was the victim. Thank you very much, sir, as you sat there on the sidelines and watched me take a tongue lashing. Thank you. I say,
So,
good day.
Andrea, for those who live in dark caves or live in the basements of outhouses or similarly out-of-the-way places, why don't you just give us a little bit, a compact version of your life story, of course, as it pertains to the Conjuring House, and then on from there, because it sounds like the adventure has continued throughout the rest of your life.
It really has. Once you're touched by spirit, it's like kicking open a door, almost taking it off the hinges. That door never closes again. And you can pretend that it doesn't exist. You can just turn your back on it. But eventually something will reach through and tap you on the shoulder and remind you that its presence is there. And I don't know if it was because of exposure or, consequently overexposure as children, but all of us have continued throughout the course of our lives to have, really remnants of encounters, and sometimes with the spirits from the farm, but far more often other entities. And I can't really explain that for sure, but I'll try to give you the 5-minute roundup.
You can even make it 10.
Yeah, go ahead.
We were living in a quaint little community called Cumberland, Rhode Island, in 1970. And through a series of very unfortunate incidents that occurred in our town and in our neighborhood, and even to our family, my mother decided that she wanted to move us out of there. We'd only lived there for 6 years. And my father said, no, Carolyn, we don't have any equity in this house yet. No, we can't move. Just keep the girls in the yard, keep a close eye on them. It'll be okay. He went off on a business trip. My mother bought the newspaper while she had taken me off to a flute lesson. And that night she was sitting quietly having a cup of coffee after we'd all gone to bed. I was 11 at the time. All my sisters, I think my youngest sister at the time was 4. And she opened the paper, and there, right in front of her, was land and farms for sale. And she said it was like the advertisement leapt out of the paper into her eyes. And she called at 9:30 at night, which is considered impolite now. In 1970, it was considered a travesty.
Yeah. How dare you call
that
me?
hour of the night.
Yeah.
But she called the real estate agent, and she made an appointment to go look at the farm the next morning, and put $500 earnest money down on it, which effectively emptied our family bank account while my father was out of town. And, had no knowledge and certainly no consent about this. And when he came home, the first thing he wanted to know was, how do we get the check back?
Yeah.
And she said, no, you need to, come. I mean, my dad's a businessman. He knows a good deal when he sees it. So we all piled in. She said, just look at the place. If you don't want it, if we can't do this, then I'll figure out how to get the money back. But, in the interim, let's go take a look.
Yeah.
And so all of us piled into our old Bonneville. Well, it was new at the time. We called it the Catholic Mobile, room for 7, the dogs, and luggage. It was just huge. And a
lot of estrogen in that.
Yeah.
Car.
Oh my, yes. 5 little girls and Mama on a mission. Mama on a mission.
Was the dog female too, or was that?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
boy, that poor man. No wonder why he went on business trips.
Poor dad.
Yeah, my poor father. But, he managed. But anyway, we took a ride out to the farm and met Mr. Kenyon, who was the current owner at the time. His wife had died about a decade before. His son was concerned that he lived in too remote an area and had built him a smaller little Cape Cod on his own property right in the village proper, and wanted him to sell the farm, really was forcing him to sell the farm. Mr. Kenyon fell madly in love with our family and wanted us to have it and moved heaven and earth, even dropped the selling price, $5,000,
Wow.
so that my parents could afford it. Now imagine this, a colonial farmhouse that was completed in 1736, one of the original barns in New England, and 200 acres of land for $72,000.
Wow.
Wow.
and they had to drop it. He dropped it 5,000 so that my parents could, eventually pull the money together. It took about 6 months.
Sure.
They closed on the property in December of 1970. My mother refused to move in the middle of Christmas, and so we moved in on January 11th, 1971. Which interestingly is, my para partner, George Lopez, that's his birthday.
Numerology.
Oh, yeah, that's just one of the many ties that George has to the farm. So anyway, we went up there, and none of us had any untoward experiences. I mean, it was just a remarkable, beautiful, stunningly beautiful piece of land. The house needed to be updated in the worst way, but it was very enticing, warm and lovely, and we just enjoyed it so much. That was in June of 1970 that we found it. And he fell in love with us, and we moved in January of 1971, as I had said. That day, we were in the midst of a swirling snow and ice storm. And toward the end of the day, after we had all, unloaded the cars and the moving van and everything, Mr. Kenyon took my dad for a walk outside, and he said, "Roger, for the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night." Well, my father didn't think anything of that, nor did he realize that 4 of his 5 children had seen a full-body apparition as soon as we walked through the door.
Really? Well, what?
And I didn't even think it was a spirit. I didn't even know what a spirit was. I was just a little kid, and all my other sisters were younger than me.
What did it look like?
He was dressed in a peculiar way, I thought. And I remember thinking specifically, does everybody out here dress like this? I mean, it was odd. He had on a kind of a tweed coat, and he had on, it appeared like his clothes were homemade. And he was standing in the corner of the dining room, and Mr. Kenyon was standing in there loading up the rest of his belongings out of the corner, the built-in china cabinet in the corner of the room. And I walked past this man, and he appeared absolutely solid to me. And I said, "Good morning, sir." And he ignored me. He was fixated on watching Mr. Kenyon. Well, my sister Christine came into the kitchen. She said, "Did you see that guy with Mr. Kenyon? He's dressed funny." And then Cindy came in. She's like, "Mom, who's that guy with Mr. Kenyon?" And she said, "There's nobody with Mr. Kenyon. His son's on the way. He's not here yet." And then Nancy walked in, and she said, "There was a man standing near Mr. Kenyon, but when I walked through the room, he disappeared."
Wow. So
that was how we were introduced.
You have
to the
three
paranormal world.
Three witnesses describing the same thing to each other.
Independently.
Yes. That is amazing.
And at one point, my father was standing in the dining room talking to Mr. Kenyon, and he was standing no more than 3 feet away from a full-body apparition that he didn't see, and we did.
Now, do you think...
So that made me, I started putting it together. I mean, I was just, 12 years old at the time. I had my birthday in October, just before we bought the farm, and, I was a kid. And, and I'm trying to make sense of this. And it was chaos. It was moving day. There were aunts and uncles, and grandma was there, and everybody was there, cars and moving van. And, we were moving the last of Mr. Kenyon's stuff out for him because he wasn't ready when we got there. I mean, it was chaos, bedlam. And yet in the midst of that, 4 of the 5 of the children completely saw an apparition that went from solid, opaque, to translucent, to gone.
Wow. My
Were
Lord.
any of you afraid at the time?
Yeah.
Or just...
No, we didn't even know what to think of it. None of us had ever been exposed to anything like it. And there was no sense of threat around him. In fact, my sister Nancy, who liked to name the spirits in the house like they were pets or something, she called him Manny because he was a man, and she wasn't really all that creative.
Manny.
So he was Manny. Consequently, later on, we pretty much figured out that it was probably Johnny Arnold, who had crawled up in the eaves of my bedroom and drank a bottle of horse liniment, which of course loaded with alcohol, and it poisoned him, and he died. It was listed as suicide, but my sense of it and being around that spirit was that it was an accidental death. He only wanted to get drunk, not dead.
Yeah, he just wanted to get a good buzz on. He didn't necessarily want to end up into the afterlife, by drinking horse liniment of all things. I mean,
Darwin.
Yeah. How long did it take before your parents started, or your mom in particular? Because it seems that the supernatural, the paranormal, ghost spirits, they tend to show themselves more to the female gender than they do the males in the beginning, at least. I mean, I don't think
it's that they show themselves more. Okay. I think that it's women, females have an extrasensory perception, mostly that women that are mothers use to keep their kids alive. Mm-hmm. Because, all kids are born knowing they're immortal, and then they proceed to try to kill themselves 18 ways from Sunday before they hit adulthood.
Yeah.
And it's that set of eyes in the back of a mother's head and that intuition in her gut that will generally keep them alive to maturity.
Oh, absolutely. My wife is way more in tune with a lot of things than I am most of the time. And she's not even like a paranormal investigator or anything. She just knows. There's just that feeling she gets. And 99% of the time, she's right on the money. Mm-hmm. Always right on the money. Same with my own mother. Same with every woman I've ever met.
Yeah, I certainly buy into that. I think it's a spectrum. And I think that kind of everyone is on that. And I think almost everyone, or perhaps everyone, can access it, but I think women are simply more in tune. Now, Andrea, that brings up a good point. Or an interesting point. Do you think that is innate, that women are more sensitive, or do you think it's cultural?
Oh no, I think that it's innate. Mm-hmm. I absolutely do, and I think that men actually have the same sense and sensibilities, but they do have a marked tendency to ignore it.
That is so true.
Yep,
that's very, very true. In my experience, far and away, more women are psychic than men, or at least openly are, and openly embrace it and use it, than men are. I also find that children, simply because they don't know what can and cannot exist yet, are more apt to see spirits, because they don't have that filter in place yet, saying, "Oh, that can't be real." That's drummed into us, beaten into us. But your mother now, when was her first experience with the charm of the home, so to speak?
Well, it really started with us first. Within a night or two of moving into the farmhouse, I was the only one that had my own bedroom. There were 3 enormous bedrooms on the upstairs of the house. I had the one right over the parlor. My sister Nancy and April had the one over the kitchen, and Cindy and Christine were bunking together in the middle bedroom, which was really the most active of the rooms upstairs. And Cindy came crawling into bed with me. It was the second or third night that we lived there, and oh my God, dead of winter, freezing cold, clapboard house, no insulation. It was a total shock to the system. And she came into my room and said, "Can I sleep with you?" And I said, "Of course, honey." And she said, "I'm scared." I said, "What are you scared about?" She said, "I hear voices in my room." I said, "Is Chris talking in her sleep?" She said, "No, it's not her." She said, "There's voices all around my bed, and I put my pillow over my head, and I still hear them. And the more I try to keep it out, the louder it gets." I said, "Well, what are the voices saying?" And she said, "It's a lot of voices. They're all talking at once. They're all saying the same thing over and over and over again." And I asked her what that was, and she said, "There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." Over and over. There wasn't a night that she spent in that house in 10 years that they didn't come to her to tell her that they were buried in the wall.
Now, were the soldiers ever found, to your knowledge?
No, there were 2 sealed off walls in the house that we never tore out or did anything to. It was just, the eaves just went on and on and on. It was so dark. It was so impossible to see up there. There was no light. Even with a flashlight, it felt like you were going into some kind of vortex. It was really bizarre, and not something that, was even, that even my father wanted to explore. And of course, we didn't really talk about what was happening with us, with my mother, because she was so busy trying to set up a new household. And as soon as we moved in, Dad had to hit the road. He had a business that took him all the way from Quebec to Florida to Ohio. He sold fine jewelry he had a trunk business out of his car and had clients everywhere. And, there was such an expenditure getting us into the house. He had to go right back to work.
Yeah.
So it was the 6 of us, Mom and the 5 girls in the house. And Cindy, I was hearing strange, archaic horns, like that I didn't find out for decades was a military horn, a call to arms, like that they use for a clarion call from the Revolutionary War. And I was hearing that, and she's hearing that there are soldiers buried in her bedroom wall. And considering that house was completed, not started, it was started in the 1600s. It was completed in 1736, the way that it is now. It was built onto over the years as the family grew. Yeah. And that was 40 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That house went through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War. It was used as part of the Underground Railroad. The Arnold family that had it for hundreds of years were abolitionists. They were Quakers. And so they would help get slaves up to Canada. When you think of the thing is, everything is energy. Everything is energy. And when you bring 5 little prepubescent kids into a house like that, I talk about feeding the beast. It was a feast.
Yeah,
we had all kinds of activity going around us, but we weren't telling our mother, nor was our mother telling us what was happening to her.
We've all seen the film by now. It's been out 3 years now, the film.
Yeah.
And a lot of, I don't think, unless you live under a rock, everyone's seen the film. Now, what was happening to her in real life? We all know what the film showed.
Yeah.
What was your mother really enduring?
I want people to know, as good a film as it is, the vast majority of it was conjured in the minds of 2 screenwriters who had way more material than they could possibly work with. The truth that they knew right directly from me was stranger than fiction. They didn't want to use it. They thought it would run people out of the theaters. And, of course, the film was supposed to be based on the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, when Ed and Lorraine Warren came to the house for the first time in 1973, we'd already lived there for 2.5 years. She immediately picked up a vibration and said, I sense a malignant presence in this house. Her name is Bathsheba. Well, there was a Bathsheba attached to the house, Bathsheba Sherman. But she, from that moment on, copped the blame for everything that was going on in the house. And the spirit that was actually tormenting my mother and targeting my mother was a spirit that was long dead before my mother, before Bathsheba was born. She spoke in a language that was archaic in Bathsheba's time.
What could it be?
Her usage.
The Bathsheba was mad because your mom was taking over the house. She became the mistress of the house. She became the head lady of the home.
Yes, but it wasn't Bathsheba. It was much more likely Mrs. John Arnold, who was found hanging in the barn at the age of 93 in the late 1700s. After her husband died, she took her own life.
Oh,
and she was the mistress of the house. We'll never know for sure. None of them ever walked up to us and said, "Hi, how are you? My name is."
Well, exactly.
None of them did.
Exactly.
And of course, the historical records are so spotty and shoddy from that period of time anyway.
Yeah, they are. It's pre-1850. It's very hard to find anything that's rock solid on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm, it is. Although, my mom did a great deal of research. She went into all the archives pertaining to the town. Also became very friendly with the town historian at the time, Mr. McEachern, a lovely, lovely man who was so old that when we met him, he knew Bathsheba Sherman when he was a boy.
Oh, he actually laid eyes on her.
She died in 1885. He was born in 1875.
Wow. Oh, sure. So he was a 10-year-old boy.
He was a 10-year-old boy when she died.
Yes.
And he knew a great deal about her, and he accused her of a lot of things. but none of us believed that she was the one that was targeting my mother. It was another spirit entirely. So, I just tell people, put everything that you see in The Conjuring completely out of your mind.
Sure.
My mother was never possessed. Ed Warren would never have conducted an exorcism on his own. He was way too steeped in the religious doctrine and tradition of the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah. He was the only layman on the planet at the time that had been trained with priests who were exorcists to assist, not to conduct one on his own.
Well, I knew Ed. I knew Ed well when he was alive, and I dealt with a demonic myself, and we talked about it in the last hour. And he was one of the people I spoke with to get a little counseling. How do I get past this? How do I unsee what I saw?
Yeah, and you can't.
You can't. It's like he said, the bell's been rung.
Yeah,
and they know.
I saw the pure, unadulterated face of evil the night that Ed and Lorraine came to the house with an entourage, including a medium who committed what I consider to be spiritual malpractice. Mm-hmm. You do not beckon all comers from the netherworld into a supremely haunted house so that you can identify who's causing the culprit, something attacked my mother that night and spoke through her.
You know what? We're gonna finish that right after this break. We gotta run a break. Okay. I'd love to get deeper into what happened to your mom and how things are handled right after the break, because boy, it's just getting started, folks. Don't go anywhere. The Conjuring begins again right now.
But before we do that, Andrea, please let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you and what your activities are and your social media, etc.
Oh, well, that's easy enough to do. I'm very easy to find. I have 5 pages on Facebook. It is the official home of the paranormal, after all. I have my personal page, my House of Darkness, House of Light page, a fan page for my newest book called In a Flicker, which is getting 5-star rave reviews from all over the planet. I'm so thrilled. I wrote that with George Lopez, my parapartner. And you can find that at inaflickernovel.com, which is a wonderful website that George built himself. It's fantastic. I encourage everybody to go check it out. And if they dare to delve into the deep end of the human psyche, then read In a Flicker. It will blow your mind wide open. They can also find me at my website, House of Darkness, House of Light. They can find me on Twitter at Bathsheba1680. Gosh, I'm everywhere. All you have to do is just Google my name and you can find me and talk to me. And, one thing I do is I make sure that, the icing on the cake and the cherry on top for me is to establish wonderful relationships with my readers. I am not one of these obsequious writers that, goes off and lives in a cave and is unattainable and untouchable. I interact with my readers a great deal, and I really enjoy doing that. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very easy to find me. Quickest way is on Facebook or through inaflickernovel.com, because George pounces on that thing like a panther every morning.
Cool,
to make sure.
Cool. And you also do a little radio yourself.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. Of course. George and I do a wonderful show together called A World Awakening, where we focus on the collective cosmic consciousness and the raising of the vibration of humanity. So to heal the world, our mission statement is, it's like, okay, we're just going to fix the planet now. Okay. You're all welcome to come along.
Audacious.
And where is that heard at, ma'am?
That is on Blog Talk Radio. It's every Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, 9 to 11. And we always post our links everywhere. You can find the direct link on my pages, on the World Awakening Facebook page, just pretty much everywhere. I just encourage everybody to come to my personal page.
Check it out.
That's where I interact with everyone the most.
Exactly. Well, great stuff. Everyone, check it all out. Listen to your show as well, and I'm sure it's out there for download as well and podcasting.
Oh, yes.
Just like everybody's show, just like this one.
Yeah, and we have a YouTube channel, too, and I have a couple of YouTube channels that's loaded with videos. on House of Darkness, House of Light, or Andrea Perron YouTube.
Check it all
very
out.
easy to find.
Check it all out, guys. You're going to enjoy it. So check it all out. Watch the videos, listen to the show, read the books. But getting back to the story, Andrea.
It's amazing.
And your mother went through her own ordeals. When we left off, it was Ed and Lorraine were at the house. They brought a psychic with them, and it called out to every spirit to ascertain, which I don't know how they'd ascertain which spirit it is if they called for every single one of them to come and show themselves or interact with her. And that seems extremely reckless to me.
It was, and my mother almost paid with her life for that act of recklessness. My father punched Ed in the face and took him right to the floor, and threw all of them out of our house. So to say that it was all lovey-dovey the way it was portrayed in The Conjuring.
We are family.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody and their ghosts and me. Yeah.
Well, even Lorraine admitted to me as I held her in my arms a few years ago, and she sobbed. She wept. And she said, it was above us. They know. They both knew that it was beyond them. The moment they stepped over the threshold, that this was something that they had never encountered before. And Ed said on his deathbed, Lorraine, you make sure that you get the Perron family story told some way or another. You get it done. My mother never sought them out. She didn't know who they were.
So the show...
Keith Johnson came to the house first in August of 1973, and we don't know why he came. He said my mother called him, and no, she didn't.
Really? See, now in the movie, of course... They show your mother, of course, approaching the Warrens at a college and, convincing them to come out, having to pull their leg to come out. And really the reality of it is you don't know why they showed up.
Well, we do know why the Warrens came.
Okay,
we don't know why Keith Johnson.
Yeah, Keith Johnson shows up for no good reason, saying he got called. No.
And he went and got the Warrens.
Yeah.
Keith Johnson went and got the Warrens. He told them in September when he saw them at a seminar, I believe at the University of Rhode Island, and told them that he knew of a family that was in great danger. They came out, they waited until, and gave them the address, and they waited until the night before Halloween, mistakenly thinking that if they came out at Halloween, that the veil would be thinner and that perhaps they would see some type of manifestation. And what they did not understand is that there is no veil, that anything could happen in our home at virtually any time.
Yeah.
And while all these things were happening with my sisters, and we were seeing, a little girl walking through the house crying for her mother upstairs, and my sister April was befriending a little boy who told her his name was Oliver Richardson. He was no more than 5 or 6 years old when he died. He was a terrified child, and my sister befriended him. April wouldn't tell. She was only 5 years old. She wouldn't tell the Warrens.
Andrea, I hate to stop you, but how do you know it was a child? In my experience with the demonic, it starts out sometimes as a child.
Oh no, this was a little boy.
Okay.
He was.
Okay.
He always stayed that way. There was something purely evil. I hesitate to call it demonic. I've never seen a demon. I don't know what a demon is. I have seen the manifestation of pure evil. Mm-hmm. So whatever attacked my mother the night of the seance, not an exorcism that occurred, the night of the seance that occurred in our home, it came into her body, Joel. I was standing in the hallway, peeking through the door with my little sister Cindy with me, and we saw all of this happen. And at first, her head went down, and she started to growl and make sounds that sounded painfully guttural. Mm-hmm. And then her body started to curl into a ball to the extent that one would expect to hear bones breaking.
Oh.
And then she threw her head back like a banshee and howled and screamed. And then she started speaking in a language that does not exist on this planet. And that is when I knew that we were in trouble, that she was in trouble. And then the table levitated. And when it came back down on the floor, it left 4 imprints in the wood. It hit the floor so hard. And then her chair that had to be a minimum of 40 pounds, not counting her being in it, began to rise very slowly. And when it was about 2 feet off the ground, in a fraction of a second, it flew from the middle of our dining room to the middle of our parlor, and we all heard my mother's skull hit the floor. And
Oh, my Lord, Andrea. Oh, I
it was
mean,
the most traumatizing event of my life.
and I imagine it's emblazoned in your mind. You remember it like it happened yesterday.
Like it happened 5 seconds ago. Yeah.
Oh, and I mean, I can just imagine. And then, of course, the fear. It's your mother. You're watching your mother being spiritually assaulted and physically assaulted.
Yes.
I mean, how powerless did that make you feel?
I thought that I was going to pass out, and I was trying to hold my sister Cindy up because she was becoming dead weight in my arms, and I was terrified that we would fall through the door. And my father was so angry that when my mother went flying into the parlor, he went to run after her, and Ed grabbed his arm and tried to stop him. And my dad turned around and cold-cocked a man that was twice his size and took him right to the floor. At 2 o'clock that morning, I was cleaning up the blood with peroxide out of the wood.
Wow.
It was so ugly. It was so bad. There are no words for it. I don't even know how it could be recreated on film, what I saw that night. It took almost an hour for my father to bring my mother back, and the Warrens did not want us to call for an ambulance, did not want any kind of outside intervention, and my father, in language that I could never repeat, nor would I as a lady, expelled them and their entire entourage from the house. Meanwhile, the cinematographers who had set up film footage in the cellar of the house were told to go back downstairs and get their very expensive state-of-the-art cameras and remove them and themselves from the house. And when they came back upstairs, these 2 full-grown men were weeping because all of their incredibly expensive equipment was shattered in hundreds of pieces all over the basement of the house. And they just went outside and sat in the van and waited for everybody else to come out. There was nothing to salvage.
Yeah. There was nothing. Wow. I mean, it just seems. I would say it sounds like a scene straight out of a movie, but it's way worse. I mean, the movie, quite honestly, doesn't do it justice. You're right.
No.
I mean, when we spoke earlier and you kind of, when I read up on things and you said in one of your interviews that the movie just doesn't give it justice, you're not kidding. There was a lot of things that could not be filmed because it was too horrific for a film of any rating. Now, after your mother was assaulted, after your father saw it, after the Warrens, now what did the Warrens really do anything is the question. Did they actually bring any kind of peaceful resolution to the situation?
No, none at all. In fact, their presence really stirred things up in the house. But I will tell you, Joel, whatever happened in that house that night, it was so evil that it actually subdued the spirits. They were as afraid as we were. They were quiet for a couple of months afterwards, and were always more, we interacted better after that. I think that they understood what we had been through, if that makes any sense at all. We came to terms of endearment. We lived in that house for 10 years.
10 years of spiritual warfare.
It was. And, the only way to make peace was for my mother to surrender and to ask for our family to be allowed to leave the house. They had it on the market for 6 months, and there wasn't a single call. There was nothing. And, it wasn't out in the world. It wasn't known as a haunted house. That's not what was keeping people away. It was the spirits. It was the psychic energy that was keeping people away. And my father cut the abutting landowner a very sweet deal because my mother told him, Roger, I will not survive another winter in this house. We have to leave.
Yeah, and she seemed to have been the focal point of all the... Now, was she the focal point of all the physical violence, or did it kind of spread to you children and your father?
I never had any issue with them. In fact, I had a very peaceable relationship with the spirits in the house. It was almost like I was the one that was deemed the journalist. I would write down everything that happened to me and everything that happened to everybody else in my family, and fill one journal after another, which was actually the basis for our family memoir, in part. Was going back. I keep everything. I'm a hoarder.
Well, hey, it's good to keep everything. And what kind of, as far as Ed and Lorraine go, and you know, not to bash them, because quite honestly, respect both of them. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I've talked with
They
both of them.
wanted to help us. They
Very
did,
good
Joel.
people.
They
did. But I guess at that point, if it would have been me in that position that they found themselves in, because later on you'll listen to it, I found myself in a similar situation where I was being beaten up, physically assaulted by unseen forces, and there's nothing more disconcerting when you get punched in the face by something you can't see. And that was my one brush, man. You learn quick. You know, you only have to touch the oven one time to realize it's hot. But why didn't they reach out to like the Catholic Church or somebody? Maybe at that time it wasn't so readily available like it is today. I mean, you know, you go on the website, there you go. You can type in, I'm haunted. Okay, but did they ever offer to bring someone of more spiritual authority in to help you people, to help the family?
They did bring a priest. They brought a priest that they knew very well, that they had worked very closely with. He was the man that was standing in the corner, as white as Casper, shaking from head to toe the night of the seance. His mind was absolutely blown. The medium collapsed into unconsciousness on the table. My mother was thrown into the parlor. Ed got punched. Lorraine got thrown out. The entourage was expelled from the house. It was the ugliest, most horrific thing that you could even imagine. But it was certainly not the only thing that happened. My mother was repeatedly threatened. One of the spirits came to her with my father laying in bed right beside her, came to her one night and got right in her face. Absolutely horrific. Obviously a broken neck. Her head looked like a desiccated hornet's nest with vacant hollow eyes and thin lips and yellow chipped jagged teeth and 2 holes where her nose should be, with sprigs of hair coming up between cobwebs.
Oh,
and
my
she was
Lord.
in my mother's face, and she said, "'Twas mistress once afore ye came, and mistress here will be anon. Will drive ye out with fiery broom, will drive ye mad with death and gloom." Threatened my mother's life if she would not leave that house. She was the one that perceived herself to be mistress of the house, and my mother was competition. And she had a thing for my father, and she coveted us, the 5 children. And she appeared to 2 of us, my sister Christine and my sister Cindy. Christine was so traumatized about it, she didn't talk about it for 40 years. I had to pry it out of her to put it in the books.
When you say a thing for your father, do you mean romantically?
Yes, she lusted after my father. She touched my father repeatedly in the cellar of the house, would stroke the back of his neck and across his shoulders. And it was very interesting that he had a peaceful relationship with her once he finally admitted that we had spirits in the house. He made my mother's life a living hell. I mean, he was denying everything that she was telling him. My mother would have swallowed her own tongue before she ever lied to her husband or ever did anything to jeopardize the health and welfare of her children. And he knew that. He was, and it took him decades to admit that he was afraid. He felt like he had absolutely no control in his own home. It finally occurred to him what Mr. Kenyon was trying to tell him.
Yeah.
Roger, leave the lights on at night. We didn't know for quite a long time after we moved in the house we've learned, later from different neighbors in the community that there was never a time that anybody drove past that farm in the wee hours of the morning that every single light in the house wasn't on. It glowed on the landscape, and that's how he kept them at bay.
Wow. I mean, just living with that kind of spiritual warfare going on, and then your father being, propositioned by unseen forces and being too afraid to say anything. Meanwhile,
your poor mother is being physically assaulted to a horrible length, and then the Warrens come in. And I did you think Here Comes the Cavalry when the Warrens came in? Did you think, oh my God,
Yes.
thank God, someone's here to listen to us. We're not all crazy. There really is something.
Right. And I mean, that's not too far a stretch to even use that word. I think that for the first few years that we were in the house, every one of us questioned our sanity at one point or another. And it wasn't until we started doing comparative analysis of encounters with each other that we all realized that basically we were all experiencing the same thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes we were experiencing it in groups.
Now, Andrea, this is perhaps the quickest hour in the history of the world. It has gone so fast.
I'd love to do a little after hours overtime, but
Man, we only have 8 minutes. So my question, which will undoubtedly could set up hours more, but we only have 8 minutes. Why? Why this place? Why this collection of spirits? Why that evil? Why you guys being chased out? Your mother imperiled, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why there?
Hindsight being 2020, at the time we stayed because it would have been a financial disaster for our family to leave. My parents put everything they had into purchasing this property. Beg, borrowed, and steal. It was everything they had. At a time, now think back, gentlemen, you're both old enough to remember the early 70s. The Watergate scandal and the oil embargo and the Nixon administration and the housing prices, the housing market in the country was plummeting. We were in a serious recession that was quickly becoming a depression in the early 70s. It was a very tumultuous time in our history that in some ways made the whole 80s, the 08 debacle look mild in comparison.
Yeah.
It was a really bad time, but I've looked back on it in deep reflection with my mother, with everyone in my family, and we've all decided that the reason that we moved into that house, that we were catapulted into that house, and why we stayed there for a decade was because we were supposed to. And then we were supposed to process it. And then we were supposed to tell the world.
Well, there are people that are probably going to hear the show that have dealt with or are dealing with things that they're maybe too ashamed to mention spiritually that are bothering them. What would be your advice, being that you lived it, to someone right now that might have something like this going on but too afraid to say anything? What would be your advice to protect themselves?
I have seen the dark side of existence, and I deliberately choose to live in the light. That makes me a spiritual warrior. That brings me a very clear understanding that I am more powerful as a human entity than anything that slips through from the netherworld. And good always conquers evil, and love always conquers fear. And no matter what is happening in your life, you can conquer it. And anybody that is having any kind of a desperate situation, people write to me all the time and they say, I read your books, and honest to God, I had this happen to me when I was a kid. I never told my parents, my siblings, my spouse when I grew up, and now I tell everybody because I read your story, and believe me, it's 1,500 pages long. It is, it's not for the weak of heart. It's not for somebody that's, not intellectually prepared for it. But I will tell you that when you read it, it will change your mind about virtually everything. And you will have an entirely different perspective on life and death and the afterlife. And I find it incredibly comforting to know that there is something beyond our mortal existence. I still can't tell you at the age of 57 what it is, what I saw when I was 12, and what I have encountered for the rest of my natural born days. But I will tell you that just that it exists is a miracle to me. And I will tell you also that when we were in crisis in that house, the only thing that stopped it was imploring the grace of God. All we had to say was, God help me, and mean it from the heart. And whatever it was stopped.
That's powerful. That's
Leaves me speechless.
Yeah.
It is. It's so comforting to know. I agree with you. It's comforting to know, to believe, to have it within your bones, your marrow, to know beyond a doubt that there is existence. There's something there and beyond life. And on the other side, while we're here dealing with this life, dealing with everything that confronts us naturally and supernaturally, that invoking God and invoking spiritual protection and love, as you said, is what it takes. And so imagine if our existence were reversed. Imagine if the dark triumphed.
Oh,
we wouldn't be here anymore.
Yeah,
and that's how I know that love conquers evil and good conquers fear.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the light always destroys the dark, not to be too cliche
always.
here, but that's exactly what happens. In my brief encounter with what was told to me to be a demonic, because I didn't believe in demonic at that time until it was explained to me by the Catholic Church exactly what a demonic is. Sometimes you have to sit under the learning tree for a minute to realize you're not that tough. Some things are just too powerful for us to deal with, and we have to turn it over to our higher power, and that's the only thing that will save you in the end, is your higher power.
I would love to come back and talk to you about what I believe is a point of integration and correlation.
Oh, absolutely.
Between spiritual activity and extraterrestrial engagement.
Would love to have you back. I mean, you're more than welcome. Come back. Love to hear all that, because that's also extremely interesting. But I want to leave our listeners with this little tidbit. If you listen to this show and you still think, or anyone out there, about demons, or I choose to call them demonic or negative or whatever, remember, folks, if you don't go looking for snakes, you ain't going to find none. So don't go looking for it. Don't go invoking it. Don't go trying to stir something up in your own lives. Because if you open the door, it will step through.
Yes.
Well put. Very well put, Joel. And your story in the first hour was astonishing, and it really bookends really well with Andrea. Why, just super quickly, because now we only have a minute, why do you think that house was such a focal point for all this activity?
I think that it's a portal very cleverly disguised as a farmhouse. I mean, 8 generations of one extended family lived and died in that house prior to our arrival.
Yeah.
And some of them never left.
Yeah, I firmly believe that there are certain places that are just an area, or not just, but they can come and go from. And that's just the energy bores it out.
And it was built on ancient Indian sites.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the Nipmuc tribe lived there prior to the colonists.
That's a whole nother can of worms right there we can talk about.
Show
but
there.
We got to get out of here. Take care of each other, love each other, and thank you again on behalf of myself, Joel Sturgis, and Mr. Eric Olson over there sitting in their co-host chair. Thank you so much, and I really want to thank Andrea Perron for coming on the show, telling her tale to us. It's not easy for her to tell this tale, believe me. If you knew, if you witnessed it, it's really hard. So that's why I want to thank you from the bottom of our heart for coming on, talking with us.
Bless you both.
Take care. Take care, everyone, and see you next time. Thank you for listening to this edition of After Hours AM, and please remember to like us on Facebook and also follow us over on Twitter.